evening, good afternoon, good night, or whenever you happen to be listening to this. Welcome to the Filmrelist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody that's hopefully for somebody. I am your host, Kyle Naranya, back for episode 29 or 30. I've actually lost count. I stopped using episode numbers because I didn't want the show to seem that there were too many inside jokes and jumping in the middle of a show. While my show is still quite young, that each episode is one you can revisit unless, of course, it's a response to a sequel I've reviewed already or maybe more episodes of a TV show or a season 1 review. I'm hoping that's not the case. If you have not found that to be the case, or you do find I use too many inside jokes or references, please let me know on Twitter. I would greatly appreciate that. This week's episode will be a review of John Wick Chapter 4, which is the newest film in the John Wick franchise. This is a franchise that started off with this one film that was released in February that blew up everywhere and did shockingly well, is now 4 films in, and we are actually getting a prequel called Ballerina starring Ana de Armas, and a prequel series that is about Winston, Ian McShane's character, as he, I believe, starts running the Continental in New York as the manager. So I believe that's on Peacock. If I look that up real quick, I believe that's where it is. I'll maybe look it up as I get into the spoiler discussion, because there may be some things that this could potentially tease. Of course, as in every episode, there will be time codes listed in the description. There will be a non-spoiler review of the film and a full spoiler with all the nitty-gritty details and specifics of the film. So let's get into the non-spoiler review of John Wick Chapter 4. John Wick Chapter 4 is again directed by Chad Stahelski, this time written by Shay Hatton and Michael Finch. Shay Hatton was also one of the screenwriters on John Wick Chapter 3 Parabellum. If you know anything about me and my Blu-ray purchasing, I think you'd probably know that the fact that there's only one film with a subtitle gives me a little bit of OCD, specifically when looking at those Blu-ray spines on the shelf. I don't like that. I don't like the fact that only one of them got a subtitle. Historically speaking, if you do look at sequels with big films in Hollywood, and this franchise certainly has turned into a blockbuster franchise, the fact that this is coming out in March, which is now unofficially the beginning of blockbuster season for 2023, is something to be said on its own. But typically speaking, unless you are a long-established franchise over many decades, potentially even longer, it's very rare to use a number, because typically that can push away occasional crowds or first-time viewers who may have not seen a film in that franchise before. So it is something to be said that this film is just John Wick Chapter 4. It's straight up the 4th installment. If you haven't seen 1, 2, and 3, you might not understand what's going on. And to some degree, I think that's probably the case, but I think that this film effectively enough gives enough of the backstory so that way you are able to keep on track and up to date with what is going on. There is a certain level of retconning to some degree in this film in particular, but there always is that case. If you go from each film down the line through this franchise, they've continually been adding to the world, adding in old friends for John, obviously because he was retired when we did see him in the first film, and so you did not get to meet all of his other assassin buddies that he was killing people with prior to meeting Helen. So that being the case, we do get to meet some new friends in this, and obviously there are some new enemies. Joining this franchise this time is Donnie Yen, Bill Skarsgård, Hiroyuki Sanada, Shamir Anderson, Rina Sawayama, and Scott Adkins. Those are all new cast members. Of course, returning Keanu Reeves, Lawrence Fishburne, Ian McShane, and I would be amiss if I did not mention the unfortunate, not to say untimely, most passing away of someone is untimely, but the fact that Lance Reddick was only 60 years old at time of his death is truly, truly upsetting. Me being an avid video game player, he's been a mainstay of the games that I've played, specifically in the last decade alone, with Destiny 1 and 2 as Zavala, and in Horizon Zero Dawn, which were, and sorry, Silence. I didn't mention his character's name if you were unaware of what it was. And Horizon Forbidden West, two games that I think are critically well received as they should be, but just phenomenal pieces of video game culture. And the fact that we are going to be getting a live action show of that is something I'm very excited for. But going back to John Wick Chapter 4, Lance Reddick is an incredible actor who's worked in multiple different genres. He was in Oz, the HBO show, as well as The Wire, some of the best pieces of drama or dramatic entertainment in the 21st century. And you could see, if you were looking at any of the press post his passing, how deeply affected his cast members and creatives were on this project. So his impact is clear, and there is some fortunate aspect of this, not at all with the passing, but I believe he did shoot all of his cameo or supporting appearance in Ballerina, so we will get to see him again in the John Wick universe at some point when that film releases, which I believe is supposed to be sometime in 2024. But moving on to John Wick Chapter 4, we are now following John as he still dealing with the aftermath of 2 and 3. If I'm good, there's going to be mild spoilers here, I guess, for John Wick's Chapter 1, 2, and 3. But again, this, I'm not going to give specific details about Chapter 4, but with him killing somebody on the grounds of the Continental in 2 and dealing with the aftermath of that in 3 and 4, he was presumed dead, but then clearly not. Even the fact, though, he full off the entire, I don't know how many stories. I think it's supposed to be like 50 stories of the New York Continental. He is ready for vengeance and just wants to get back to his life of nothing, which I would say feels like a stretch given the amount of action in this film. But what this film's creativity and the length to the action scenes on paper could seem somewhat daunting and get to the point where it gets stale, as you've seen what they're going to do over and over and over again. But I would say that's completely untrue. The action design in this film, as well as the spectacle that they are able to do, 87 North, 8711, whatever they're called now, puts together action sequences in this film unlike anything you've seen before. They've talked about how important prep is, pre-production, planning out these action sequences, the level of sophistication with the camera work. The spectacle is unlike anything you've seen from a John Wick film before. Of course, there are going to be elements that are familiar to you if you were a fan of this franchise. Keanu is clearly putting on the work. There's a ton of gung fu and jujitsu, particularly in your close hand-to-hand combat. But if you look at some of the actors who are known for their action involved in this franchise, we certainly get a level of finesse and prowess that you have not gotten from some of these films before, specifically with Scott Adkins, Donnie Yen, and Hiroyuki Sanada, Hiroyuki Sanada just in general has been blowing up lately, and I'm a big fan of his. If you look at the army of the franchise, he was in Endgame for like half a second, but then he was in Bullet Train. He's now in this. The guy is in more and more Hollywood-based films, which I think is amazing because his acting style and how he is able to just add depth with very little. Not to say he's not given anything to do, because I do believe he is given some substance in the film, but the fact that you immediately feel this history with this character and his relationship with John Wick, which may be good or bad. I'm not going to tell you about that right here, but it would be remiss of me not to mention more of Donnie Yen. He is the Ip Man. He is one of the most talented martial artists in the 21st century when it comes to cinema. You have your Bruce Lees, you have your Jet Lees, you have your Jackie Chans, and you have Donnie Yen. He is the Ip Man. His speed alone is incredible, and the character that he is able to play in this, which I don't believe the specifics were given away in the marketing material, so I'm not going to say what makes his character unique, or Scott Adkins, who you may not know who Scott Adkins is, but I guarantee you, if you've watched an awesome action film in the last 20-something years, I almost guarantee Scott Adkins is in it. He was in Ip Man 4, and he was in Doctor Strange, the original film directed by Scott Derrickson. He had more of a, not even supporting role, but he was one of the titular henchmen of Mads Mikkelsen's character. And I did not expect them to be doing what they do with Scott Adkins in this, but I thought it was certainly something that is different from what he has done before. The story in this may be the lightest of the four, and it's certainly a focus. Obviously, a film's story is a focus, but in terms of getting the character from point A to point B, I think this may be, in my opinion, the second of the films, because what made these so unique, specifically the first one, was the story was something that everybody could get on board for, and then you followed this person on this trek through this weirdest universe ever where almost everybody is an assassin. And to some degree that continues with this film, but you get to see more of what is going on. You get characters who are representing the high table. What is the politics with how does John Wick get out of the scenario? How does he punch his ticket metaphorically and potentially literally, so that way he is gone. He is retired again because he did not think he was back in, but he is, obviously the famous line from the first one. Clancy Brown is a character that I really enjoyed in this. Again, you talk about somebody who was able to do a lot, and not in terms of a over performance, but the subtlety in what he's able to do in his tone of voice is incredible. He is Lex Luthor from the DC animated universe. So, and you may recognize him from films like Starship Troopers, as well as Shawshank Redemption, Highlander. I really enjoyed his character. This maybe has the least amount of world building in terms of what we do get to learn about the high table. We do get to see another Continental. That may be the mildest of spoilers, and I apologize, but this is the most expensive of the films, and they really push the spectacle more than anything. And I'm not even talking specifically about the action sequences, because there is a oneer in a abandoned building which blew my mind. I can't even explain how intricately designed it was and how unique the camera angles were, because it was unlike any oneer I'd ever seen before. There may be stitching, and by that I mean cuts that they put together somewhere in that, but I had a really hard time picking out where they precisely may be. But regardless, it is an absolute joy to watch this film from start to finish. They do bring some reverence and some humor in that to cut through what is a very grim film. There is some violence that is on the gorier side than I would like. I'm somebody who does not enjoy that particular aspect of an R-rated action film. So there was a moment where I did close my eyes, and I can tell you specifically what that is in spoilers. But I think that this film is wildly entertaining. The cinematography is the best of these films, period. And going into real locations, again, this is something that's been critical of other blockbusters, but getting to actually see the scope of where you are and lighting scenes. And I don't know if you are following Stephen Colbert, but I'd be curious if he thinks there was any key, lighting issues with this film. I didn't think they were particularly bad, but I really enjoyed this. I think the score is fantastic as always. Tyler Bates's theme for John Wick is something I thoroughly enjoy. I don't know where we are going to go with this franchise, if we are going to get a fifth. I know it's been talked about, but I can tell you specifically why I'm not sure about that in spoilers. But this is a spectacle for the big screen. I do not think you would enjoy it nearly as much if you were watching this at home. Now, I'm looking forward to a repeat viewing. I may go on a cheap day up here in Canada, which is typically on a Tuesday, which I would enjoy seeing it again, seeing if I missed any of the specifics. But the spectacle is there if you are a fan of the John Wick films. I've said that already. I think, again, story is not necessarily the main focus, as these are meant to be the practical, crazy action films, which they certainly have become. The level of cartoonism in terms of unrealistic elements is done respectfully to the same degree, I would say, of 3. If I were to rank all 4 of them, I think I would say that this is my second favorite of the 4. They all have really amazing sequences, but the level of technical prowess is certainly here. It's shown how Chad Stahelski has evolved as a filmmaker. I'm very curious, because they have said they are taking a break, him and Keanu, from John Wick, if he gets pulled into another franchise that may heavily rely on action. There was some talk of Blade, but regardless, I'm very curious as to seeing what he picks with his next project. He is supposed to be making the Highlander film with Henry Cavill. Fingers crossed that happens, because I would love to see the two of these creatives work together on something like that, that is a recognizable IP for true cinephiles. So that's it for my non-spoiler section of the review. John Wick Chapter 4 starts off with John Wick going back to see the Elder, who he had his finger cut off before in the third film. And ultimately, we just see him trying to survive the result of the last two films. And ultimately, what seems to be his saving grace is that the Bill Skarsgård character has this vendetta out for him because he believes having John Wick taken out will result in him ascending to be a member on the high table. I think Bill Skarsgård does a fantastic job as this sleazy Frenchman, which some may say is a cartoon of a character, but I think it's very entertaining in this, and the sadistic quality that we get to see with him in this film is very entertaining. The other new characters in this film are, of course, Donnie Yen as Kane, who is an old friend of John Wick's, who is essentially Daredevil to some degree. He's blind and has the inexplicable, incredible ability to fight and maintain being assassin. He, similarly to John, gave up being an assassin and gave his eyes to the high table as a result, not physically, but was blinded so that way he could protect his daughter. So it's something that really centers him as somebody who you don't necessarily hate throughout the film because he is only doing what he has to support his daughter. It's certainly something that John sympathizes and can empathize with, doing something specifically for a loved one, obviously going back all the way to the first film. So he is not a straight up villain, but he is certainly an antagonist to John while they are still playing up their history. I wouldn't say they're necessarily friends, but they, not that they even believe in each other. I'm almost at a lack for words. They are professional and they are doing what they need to survive, but they respect each other, and their history plays up a lot of how these characters interact. Donnie Yen is an incredible actor, and his ability in action is amazing. If you've seen any of the Ip Man films, he was Chirrut Imwe in Rogue One. I thought that his character was amazing. Another action legend with Scott Adkins as Keela Harkin is one of the funniest things I've seen him do probably ever, where you put somebody who is in phenomenal shape with Scott Adkins in a fat suit and see him do these spin kicks, roundhouse kicks, side kicks, and have a full-blown fight with John Wick. It was hilarious but amazing all at the same time, set in the rain in a club. There's been jokes about the clubbers not responding or reacting to any of the violent things going on in front of them, but you know, it's a John Wick film. Everybody's pretty much an assassin if we've seen any of these films. Remember in 2 when Winston was in control of everybody that was in Central Park? Crap like this happens all the time, apparently. The third, we have 3 or 4 new characters. Hiroyuki Sanada plays the manager of the Osaka Continental, another old friend of John's. When in doubt, just write somebody who's an old friend of the character. Again, the depth that you were able to get from this character and his history with John is palpable. He has a daughter who he doesn't openly admit is his daughter, but ultimately she goes down the path of vengeance because Kane, because of his duty to protect his daughter, ultimately kills Koji. Ironically, the name of Andrew, same last name as Andrew Koji, who was in Bullet Train, who was with him, which is certainly funny, but could lead that character, specifically Akira, who is Koji's daughter, down the path of vengeance. And spoilers, we're in the full spoiler section. That is teased in the post-credit scene when Kane does return to Paris. I've mentioned this already in the non-spoiler section, but the landscapes and set design, as well as the actual locations that this film go to, are amazing. Really getting to see the full scope of the $100 million they spent on this film, the most expensive of all of them. And you know what? It was the biggest opening for the film. So safe to say that this is going to be successful, which is incredible. But what I really liked about this film more than the last 2 is getting to focus on John. We understand why in 2 he is pulled back because of the marker that was given to him and he had to do that job, which ultimately puts him in this black hole of you killed a high table member just for the guy's brother. And he kills that high table guy in the Continental, which you're not allowed to do. That's one of the main rules. You cannot have or do a job or commit a crime of murder. Specifically, I don't know if we get any specificity as if you can do like other things like steal. But regardless, obviously murder being the thing they do. They're hitmen, not thieves. Or maybe they're both. Who knows? And 3 just kind of is like, what's going on? How do I get out of this? And we do get to see some more exploration of John's relationship with the Russians. We go to Belgium where we get to see his ticket reprinted by Nymphadora Tonks from Harry Potter. That is Natalia Tena, who plays his adoptive sister. And I like that because the way that we get from scene to scene does connect through narratively as to why John is going to specific places. He could have just been on the run, which is some of what we get in chapter 3, but I think the narrative through line of him just trying to find a way out where I can just kill this not high table guy, but the Marquis who wants to be on the high table, or sorry, is a member of the high table who's kind of gone rogue because he wants to kill John Wick so bad, is a good through line. And I think that the way that they are able to get to it, which is following the old rules, which is John needs to find a way to become a legitimate member again so he can be somebody's chosen assassin for a duel. So building to that, I think, was really cool, specifically with the whole setup is done in the style of an old-fashioned duel where you have not a revolver, but an old gun standing at 30 paces, moving 20, 30, or 20, 30, 20, 10, closer to each other is really cool. Obviously, the person, of course, the Bill Skarsgård chooses to represent him is Kane, John Wick's friend. And I think that building to something where you have 2 friends fighting was certainly a really amazing climatic event. I almost thought that for a second we weren't going to get it again because John Wick Chapter 5 was initially greenlit and they were going to shoot them back to back. But then a little film called Matrix Resurrections, Matrix 4, whatever it was called, I didn't really like it, was going to be coming out and they just shot Chapter 4. And there have been rumors that they did kind of combine the story into one film, and that would make sense in that ultimately Kane and John are able to both get what they want, which is John Wick is injured during the fight and is able to ultimately kill the Marquis, the member of the high table played by Bill Skarsgård, which ultimately clears him of any wantings from the high table. He's clear of any bounties and he's able to retire and move on with his life. But he suffers so many injuries leading to the duel and is shot so many times that ultimately he passes away on the steps in front of the church in Paris and does die. So there may be some ambiguity. It's been a long day. I apologize. Whichever one is the right pronunciation. Let's say I said that one and didn't cut out the one that was wrong. And John is buried. That was an element that comes up when he is talking to the Bowery King and Winston about what they want on their tombstones. And he says loving husband, which we do eventually get to see on his tombstone next to Helen's, which did say loving wife. So there seems to be some sort of conclusion to this. I was half expecting there to be a post-credit scene where it's revealed that he's alive, but quite frankly, I think this was a fantastic finale. I mentioned this in the non-spoiler section, but there is a oneer where essentially we are looking at a fight sequence from the rafters of this building, moving all along. There's dragon fire, which is shotgun shells that explode with flame. It's fantastic. The other character that I've almost forgotten to mention is Shamir Anderson, who plays Mr. Nobody, who is a tracker who seems to be specifically tracking John and working with the Marquis to raise the bounty to a certain amount of millions, because then maybe he can buy his way out. Now, his overall motivation is not specifically given. We do get to see he has a journal from time to time, and he is a phenomenal tracker. And there's a scene where he cuts a big chunk of slices through his hand, which was, I thought, absolutely disgusting and something I never want to see again, which is unfortunate because if I watch this film again in a rewatch, I'm certainly going to have to watch that scene with my eyes closed. I guess that's an oxymoron, watching something with your eyes closed, but you understand what I'm saying. And so that character was fun, getting to see somebody who was kind of outside of what was going on because he's helping John and then he's trying to kill John and then he's helping John because he wants John to survive so that way he can track him, so that way he can raise the bounty to eventually kill him. And there is some through line with a dog, which does connect him and John, which I actually don't want to spoil. I don't want to give away every single piece of information. But What are we going to get from this franchise moving forward? We don't know. I think this was a phenomenal conclusion. It is almost 3 hours long, and I think you probably could have cut some of the runtime down, but why would you when the action choreography, the stunts in this film are incredible, and they show what happens when you put the best people on it and give them the time to prepare, and when you know how to shoot it right. It's not over edited, it's not simple, it's creative, and it's so much fun, wildly entertaining. I thought it was a lot of fun. And while that may sound like dismissive, these films know exactly what there are. And while it's something I spoke about with Steven when we talked about Shazam Fury of the Gods, when a film knows what it's trying to do and it can execute on such a specific level, I think that's amazing, and why these films have been successful, and clearly the audience is continuing to grow and support them, and you can see that with what the opening box office numbers were for this film. I think you should check it out. If you've seen any of them, you could go watch this one. If you haven't, go see it, and then maybe go back and watch chapters 1, 2, and 3. If this is the final film in the John Wick franchise, I think it's a phenomenal ending. I have nothing else left to say about it. I hope you enjoyed the spoiler section of the review. And I hope that I see you next week, where I will be reviewing Dungeons and Dragons Among Thieves, the second theatrical attempt at a Dungeons and Dragons film. This has been getting some positive early press, so I hope that it's good. Let me know if you see it, or if you were planning on seeing it, or if you have seen John Wick Chapter 4 and what you thought about it. You can tweet at the podcast Twitter, that's at FilmRealist, or you can tweet at me, at Kyle_Naranya. I hope you have a great rest of the week, and I will see you next time.